He laughed. He never laughed before. Richard Hale stood motionless on the stone path leading to the pool, his hand frozen on the back gate. For a moment he thought the heat was playing tricks on him. That sound couldn't be real. But there it was again, a laugh. High, soft, fleeting, like a ripple of wind across the water. His son was laughing, not crying, not moaning, laughing. Laughing. 6 years of silence, and now this. He took a slow step forward, eyes locked on the scene before him, in the glimmering blue of the pool, held gently. In the arms of a young woman, Noah floated. His arms moved through the water clumsily, but with intention. His lips curved slightly. A second laugh, louder than the first, escaped him like a miracle. Richard had stopped praying for long ago. Julia Bennett didn't turn around. She didn't need to. Her eyes were fixed on the child in her arms, and her grip firm but wavered. She didn't cheer or cry out or look up for approval. She simply whispered, "You're doing great, Noah," just like that. Richard's knees weakened. He gripped the wooden post beside him. Noah was still in the water, still floating, still laughing. And Julia, just the maid, the one person in the house who never claimed to have any special training, never asked to try anything new, never promised anything, had just unlocked something that millions of dollars and a parade of experts hadn't. What did she do? How? He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. All he could do was watch and feel everything inside him crumbled. Guilt, pride, fear, hope, Paul, crashing together like waves against the pool's edge. Then Noah looked up. It wasn't a long look, just a flicker, but his eyes met Richard's, and then came the third laugh. This one wasn't soft. It was delighted, uncontrolled, the kind of sound a child makes when they're free. Richard's heart buckled. 6 months earlier, back. Day fades into memory. The sun was relentless that morning, but Richard barely noticed. He stood in the foyer of his California estate, polished wood floors gleaming beneath his bare feet, a mug of untouched coffee cooling in his hand. He was staring at the new hire. She was smaller than he expected, pale, tired-looking, with freckles across her nose and a worn canvas tote bag clutched tightly in her fingers. "Julia Bennett?" he asked, voice clipped. She nodded once. "Yes, sir. This isn't a nanny job, or a nurse's position," he said plainly, walking past her toward the kitchen. "It's cleaning, laundry, general maintenance. I prepare Noah's meals myself. I oversee his therapy. I understand he doesn't speak. He doesn't walk. He doesn't react much. You won't need to engage. I'm not here to fix anyone," she said simply. "I just needed the work." Something about the way she said it, steady, not sad, made him stop. He turned back and studied her, face young but not fragile. "You have experience with cleaning?" she asked. "Yes, and grief, if that helps." He didn't ask what she meant. She didn't explain. That was the first time. He didn't feel the need to push. Noah was in the therapy room when she saw him for the first time. 6 years old, thin still, strapped loosely into his wheelchair with a light blue band across his lap. His head lolled slightly to the right, eyes unfocused. A small toy piano sat untouched on the tray in front of him. Julia paused in the doorway. The other maids before her had always spoken brightly at first. "Hi there," or "You're such a handsome boy." But she didn't say a word. She just nodded to Richard and quietly began wiping down the nearby counter. He watched her work for a few minutes, no questions, no overstepping, no lingering glances toward Noah. That night, as he poured himself a glass of wine, Richard found himself remembering that silence. It was ... peaceful. The days passed like that. Julia swept floors while Noah sat still. She washed dishes while Richard read case files on new speech devices. She moved through the house like background music, gentle, reliable, and never too loud. She didn't ask questions, she didn't offer advice, but she noticed things. The way Noah blinked twice whenever she ran water in the sink, the way his fingers twitched slightly when the window near the pool was open, the way his shoulders relaxed when she didn't look at him too long. One afternoon, she stood by the kitchen faucet, letting the stream run longer than necessary. Noah, seated nearby, turned his head only slightly, but it was movement. She said nothing, just smiled softly and finished washing the spoon. A week later, Richard caught her sitting near the pool, not swimming, not sunbathing, just sitting on the stone edge, legs folded, watching the surface shimmer in the late morning light. He stepped closer. "You like it out here?" She nodded. "It's the only place that doesn't feel like a hospital." He didn't respond. After a moment she added, "I think Noah might like it too." He raised an eyebrow. "He's never been in the water. Maybe he doesn't need to swim," she said. "Maybe just listen." That night, Richard found himself standing by Noah's bedroom door longer than usual, listening to the white noise machine hum gently in the background. He imagined the sound of water instead. 3 days later, he returned from a phone call to find Julia kneeling beside Noah's wheelchair, gently tapping a plastic cup of water with her fingers. Tap. Tap. Noah's hand twitched. Richard froze in the doorway. He likes the rhythm, Julia said softly, without looking up, or maybe the echo, I'm not sure. You shouldn't, I didn't touch him, she said gently. Just the cup. A pause. He smiled a little, she added. Richard looked down. That's ... not typical. Julia stood, wiping her hands on her jeans. Maybe nothing about Noah needs to be. That night Richard walked out to the pool for the first time in months. He stood at the edge, staring down at the calm surface. He whispered, "What if she's right?" "You don't have to speak to be heard," Julia said, her voice low as she folded a towel in the hallway. "But someone has to be willing to listen." Richard leaned against the doorframe, watching her with arms crossed. "You really believe that?" he asked. "I do," she replied without looking up. "Because I've lived it." It had been 2 weeks since Julia arrived, and the rhythm of the house had shifted almost imperceptibly. There was no big change, no miracle moment, just ... less tension, less noise that came from silence trying too hard to be filled. The therapy room remained the same, sunlight pooling across wooden floors, colorful charts on the walls, and a revolving door of therapists trying one more thing, one more method, one more promise. But Julia wasn't interested in promises. She was interested in presence. That morning, Richard had noticed something. Noah hadn't flinched when she entered the room. In fact, when she walked past his chair, his fingers twitched. Slightly dashed twice. Blink. Twitch. The smallest movement could hold oceans. Richard didn't say anything, but he saw it, and so did she. Later that day, Julia quietly wheeled Noah to the edge of the sunroom. The glass wall faced the garden, where the pool shimmered like glass. She didn't say a word. She just parked the chair, opened the sliding door a few inches, and let the sound of water filter in. It was soft, subtle, barely more than a whisper, but Noah's eyes flicked toward it, not wide-eyed or startled, just aware. Richard stood behind the curtain, unseen, holding his breath. Julia crouched next to him, not looking at Noah, looking at the light on the water instead. "He listens in ways most people forget how to," she said. Noah didn't move, again, but he didn't look away either. That night, the house was quiet. Richard sat in his study, an untouched book open in his lap, eyes fixed on the fireplace, though no fire burned. He thought of all the people who had come through his homes, caregivers, consultants, educators, so many voices trying to break through silence with louder sound. And then there was Julia, a woman who spoke with pauses and noticed what others missed. He remembered something she had said earlier that day. Sometimes it's not about pulling them into our world, it's about meeting them in theirs. The truth of it hit him like wind across a still lake. The next morning, Julia asked softly, "Would it be alright if I took Noah outside?" Richard hesitated. "He doesn't like direct sun," he said. "I'll keep him in the shade, and noise can overwhelm him. It'll be quiet, just the water." Richard looked at her, the tension in his jaw obvious. "What exactly are you trying to do?" Julia didn't blink. "I'm not trying to do anything. I just want to see if he wants to be somewhere different." It wasn't a challenge. It was an invitation. Richard hesitated, then gave a single nod. They rolled Noah's chair down the back path, the wheels bumping gently over stone. Richard followed a few steps behind, hands in his pockets, cautious but curious. Julia guided the chair beneath the pergola, a shaded alcove. At the edge of the pool, she crouched beside him, eyes level. "You hear that?" she whispered, the sound of the filter gurgling, the small splashes as the breeze danced across the water. Noah didn't move. Then his eyes blinked. Once slowly, Julia tapped the armrest twice, mimicking the rhythm of the water. Noah blinked again. Richard felt his chest tighten. "He's responding," Julia said gently. "Not because I asked him to, because he wants to." Richard cleared his throat. "What does that even mean?" Blinking. "It means he's aware, and that's a beginning." Later, inside the house, Richard stopped Julia near the laundry room. "You talk to him like he understands every word." She turned, not defensive, just steady. "That's because I believe he does." Richard ran a hand through his hair, visibly torn. "Julia, do you know how many specialists told me he wouldn't even recognize my face, and how many of them stayed long enough to find out?" she asked. That silenced him. Then she added, "I'm not promising anything, but I know what it's like to be looked at like you're broken when all you need is someone to wait." The next day, something extraordinary happened. Julia walked into the living room with a basin of warm water and a soft cloth. She gently placed the bowl on the floor and sat down beside it. Noah's chair was nearby. angled slightly so he could see the reflection of sunlight dancing on the surface. "I thought we could bring the pool inside today," she said softly. She dipped her fingers in, letting the water drip slowly onto her palm. Plink, plink. Noah blinked. Richard watched from the hall, arms folded, expression unreadable. Julia spoke again. "I used to do this with my daughter. She loved the sound," said. "It made the house feel like it had a heartbeat." Noah's hand moved. It was subtle, a shift, barely an inch, but it moved. Julia didn't react. She just repeated the motion. Another drip, another sound. Noah's head tilted, ever so slightly. Richard turned away. He couldn't take it. Not yet. That evening, Julia stood in the doorway to Noah's room. The boy was asleep, breathing soft and even. Richard sat in the hallway, elbows on his knees. "I saw his hand move," he said. "I know," she replied, "and I felt like I couldn't breathe," he admitted. Julia walked over and sat beside him, cross-legged like a child. "It's scary," she said, "when something beautiful feels like it might slip through your fingers if you hold it too tight." He turned to her. "Do you ever get tired of hoping?" She met his gaze and replied, "Only when I stop noticing the little miracles." A long silence fell between them, not heavy, just full. Then she added, "You've been carrying all of this alone, haven't you?" Richard looked down. "It's my son. Who else should?" "You're not wrong," she said quietly. "But even the strongest trees need roots that run deep. Otherwise, they fall." Back in his room, Richard sat on the edge of his bed, staring at a framed photo of Noah's mother on the nightstand. "She would have liked you," he whispered. Down the hall, Julia stood by the open window, letting the night air cool her skin. And Noah, safe, still, peaceful, dreamed of water. The sound of running water filled the room, soft and steady. Julia sat cross-legged on the floor of the therapy room, a shallow bowl beside her. She dipped her fingers in and flicked droplets across the tiled surface. Plink, plink, like a song only she and Noah could hear. Noah, in his chair, was watching. That in itself was something. His eyes tracked the movement, not fast, not dramatic, clearly, undeniably aware. Richard stood in the doorway, arms folded, trying not to lean too far in, as if proximity might shatter the fragile thread of attention stretching between them. "He follows the sound," Julia said, her voice a near whisper. Richard didn't answer. She didn't expect him to. She dipped her hand again, creating a ripple in the bowl. The reflection of light danced on the ceiling. Noah blinked. Once. Then again. And then, something new. His lips moved. Not a word, not a sound, just a shift. Julia didn't gasp or cheer. She simply smiled and whispered, "I see you." That evening, Richard met her in the kitchen. Julia was washing dishes, sleeves rolled up, the scent of lemon soap in the air. He hesitated at the doorway, watching her move with that calm grace he was beginning to recognize as her truest gift. "I want to ask you something," he said. Julia glanced up, not startled. "Go ahead. Why did you take this job?" She wiped her hands on a towel, then leaned back against the counter. "Because I needed quiet," she said, "and I thought this place might understand mine." Richard frowned, uncertain. "What do you mean?" She looked out the window before answering. "My daughter died," she said simply. "She was only 3 weeks old." The silence that followed was deep and unyielding. "I'm sorry," Richard said, after a long moment. "I'm not telling you for sympathy," Julia replied gently. "I just think it matters. Why we choose where to go when we're broken." Richard swallowed hard. "You think this house is broken?" he asked, quieter now. "I think this house is trying," she said, "and that counts for something." The next morning, Julia didn't wait for permission. She pushed Noah's chair out to the garden. The sun was warm but not harsh. A breeze fluttered the linen canopy above the pergola. She parked his chair beside the pool and sat cross-legged on the stones. Barefoot. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, "Noah, if you ever feel like saying something, you don't have to make it perfect, you just have to make it yours." Noah looked toward the water. His fingers twitched once, twice. Julia leaned back, closed her eyes, and began to hum. Not a song with words, just melody, soft, slow, steady. It was something her mother used to do when the world got too loud. Noah's hand lifted slightly, almost hovering over the armrest. The humming continued. Richard, watching through the window, didn't realize he was holding his breath. Then Noah did something he hadn't done before. He reached, not far, not dramatically, but his hand moved toward the edge of the chair, toward the sound, toward connection. And Julia didn't celebrate, she simply shifted, so he could hear her better. Later that day, as Richard walked through the hall, he paused. Outside the art room, mostly unused, a space his late wife had once hoped would be Noah's sanctuary, Julia stood inside, looking at a shelf of supplies. Finger paints, crayons, paper. He knocked on the doorframe. Thinking of painting, he asked. She smiled. Not me. Richard stepped in, the air thick with old memories. She used to believe that color could speak louder than words. He murmured that if we gave Noah a brush, he'd show us everything he couldn't say. Julia looked at him. Maybe she wasn't wrong, maybe she was just early. Richard let the thought settle. I don't know how to keep hoping. He admitted, I used to build things, code, companies, systems. I could fix anything. He turned to her, eyes dark. But I can't fix my son. Julia's voice was soft, but steady. Maybe he doesn't need fixing. Maybe he just needs someone who doesn't walk away when the silence gets too long. Richard looked down, jaw clenched. Sometimes I wonder if he even knows who I am. Julia stepped closer. He knows, she said. He may not show it the way you want, but he knows who stands by him, who doesn't give up. That night, something changed. Richard stood at Noah's doorway, watching him sleep. A soft nightlight glowed near the bed. Julia had placed it there the week before, shaped like a moon, warm and constant. Richard walked in, knelt beside the bed, and whispered, I'm still here, buddy, even if I don't always know how to be. Noah stirred slightly, fingers curling. Inward. Richard didn't expect a miracle. He just wanted the truth to land somewhere deep. The following morning, Julia waited by the edge of the pool, a small flotation vest in her lap. When Richard walked out, surprised to see them already outside, she looked up. He likes the water, she said. I think he's ready. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. You're not trained for that. I know. What if something goes wrong? I'll be right there. A pause. Then she added, but I won't do it without you here. That caught him. She wasn't asking for permission. She was offering trust. And for once, he didn't resist. Together they gently placed Noah into the vest. Julia stepped into the shallow end first, then slowly guided the boy into her arms. The moment his skin touched the water, Noah stiffened. But Julia held him. I've got you, she whispered. You're safe. Richard crouched at the edge, watching every muscle in his son's body. At first stillness, then relaxation, and then ripples, small, circular, perfect. Noah's hands moved gently across the surface, and for the first time, in the embrace of water and trust, Noah smiled. You're really going to put him in the water? Richard's voice was quiet, but the tension in it cut through the still morning air like glass. Julia didn't flinch. She was kneeling by the edge of the pool, the small flotation vest folded neatly in her lap. Sunlight filtered through the pergola above, dappling the stone floor and catching in Noah's curls as he sat in his wheelchair beside her, head tilted toward the water's soft rhythm. I'm not doing anything to him, she replied. I'm offering it's up to him. Richard walked forward slowly, arms crossed, his gaze locked on the pool as if it might bite. It's not a toy, Julia. He's never been in art. Not once. I know. What if he panics? What if he stiffens? He could go under. I'll be with him. Every second he stared at her. You're not trained for this. Julia met his eyes. Calm, steady, certain. No, I'm not trained. I'm just present. And sometimes, presence is the only thing that matters. That silence again, one of many they'd shared lately, the kind that was neither cold nor hostile, just heavy, real. Then, without another word, Richard walked over to Noah's chair. He crouched beside his son, brushing the boy's hair gently from his forehead. Noah blinked once, then again. Richard exhaled. Okay, but I'm staying close. Julia smiled softly. I was hoping you would. They took it slow, painfully slow. Julia rolled up her jeans and stepped into the shallow end first. The water hugged her calves, cool and inviting. She turned back, hands open. Let's try it together, she whispered. Richard lifted Noah gently, his movements both practiced and hesitant like someone carrying a fragile photograph. He passed the boy into Julia's arms, his hands lingering, just a second longer than necessary. I've got you, she murmured to Noah. Cradling him carefully, Richard stepped back, hovering on the edge like a shadow. As Julia moved deeper, the water rose up to Noah's waist. His body tensed immediately, legs stiffening, hands clawing slightly at the air. It's okay. You're safe, she said softly, her hand spread across his back. Breathe, Noah. Just breathe with me. For a second, Richard nearly rushed forward, but then Noah exhaled. His shoulders dropped, his hands opened. The fight in his muscles gave way to something softer. He wasn't sinking, he wasn't resisting. He was floating. Julia's voice was barely audible now. Let the water hold you, Noah, just like I'm holding you. And then it happened. A laugh. Light, sharp, beautiful. Richard froze. It wasn't much, just one little burst of sound, but it carried the weight of years. It echoed off the water, bounced against the stone walls, and shattered every quiet assumption he'd built about his son. He stepped forward without thinking. Noah laughed. Again, this time longer, fuller. His fingers skimmed across the water, creating ripples that sparkled under the sun. Richard dropped to his knees by the poolside, one hand gripping the edge as if to ground himself. "My God," he whispered, "he's laughing." Julia didn't look up. She didn't need to. "I know," she said. "It's not a miracle, it's a beginning." They stayed like that for nearly 10 minutes, Julia holding Noah gently, rocking in slow circles, the boy's small body growing more relaxed with every pass. When they finally emerged, Richard met them with a towel already in hand. He wrapped Noah slowly, carefully, like a sacred ritual. For the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of breaking his son. He wasn't just tolerating it, Richard said, voice hushed. He liked it. He chose it. Julia said, "That's the difference." As they dried him off, Noah's eyes didn't dart away like usual. They stayed fixed on the water, then on Julia, and just for a heartbeat in Richard. And Richard saw something he hadn't dared hope for in a long time. Recognition. That night, the mansion felt different, not louder, not brighter, just alive. Richard stood in the kitchen, watching Julia stir a pot of soup. Noah sat nearby in his chair, humming softly, not a melody, not even intentional, but a sound nonetheless, his own. "I keep thinking about that moment," Richard said suddenly, when he laughed. Julia smiled. "Me too. I've spent so long trying to find the right expert, the best method, the perfect solution, and I missed the simplest thing." He looked at her. "Connection," he said. "You gave him that." Julia stirred slowly, then set down the spoon. "I didn't give it to him," she said. "He reached for it. I just didn't step away." Later that evening, Richard stood by the large window in Noah's room. The moon cast silver light across the floor. Julia entered quietly. "He's asleep," she whispered. Richard nodded, his voice low. "I used to think silence was the enemy." "It's not," Julia said. "It's the waiting room for the things worth hearing." He looked at her, eyes tired but awake in a way they hadn't been for years. "I was wrong about you," he admitted. "I know," she said kindly. "You were scared. So was I." There was a long pause. Then she added, "But fear's just a place we pass through, not a place we live." Outside, the pool sat still again, quiet under the stars. But something had changed. Ripples had begun, and they wouldn't stop now. "Did you hear that?" Julia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard didn't answer. He COULDN single quotes T. He was standing still, completely, utterly still next to the pool, watching his son float in the water under the soft glow of a golden afternoon. But the sound was unmistakable. Noah had just said something. It was faint, a whisper carried by wind and hope, but it was real. The boy turned his head toward the edge of the pool, eyes wide and focused, more focused than Richard had ever seen them. And then, he said it again, clearer, softer, double quotes, "Daddy." Richard's entire body collapsed onto his knees, not from weakness, but from something bigger. The sound of that word, that single, simple word, felt like it had been locked behind glass for 6 years, and now suddenly, impossibly, it had broken free. Julia instinctively moved to the edge of the pool, still holding Noah close, but she didn't interrupt. She didn't speak. She knew what this moment meant, and she knew it wasn't hers to narrate. Richard crawled forward, slowly, hands trembling, eyes brimming with disbelief. "Noah," he choked. "Say it again." Noah blinked. A beat of silence, then came the whisper again, even more assured. "Daddy." Richard covered his mouth, shoulders trembling, his vision blurred. He hadn't cried in years, not when his company lost millions, not even at his wife's funeral. But now, the word cracked something inside him so deep he didn't know it existed. He leaned over the water and whispered, "I'm here. I'm right here." Noah's fingers reached out, barely touching the surface, as if confirming everything was real. Later, inside the house, Richard sat on the floor with a towel wrapped around his shoulders, drying his son's feet with careful hands. He looked up at Julia, his voice raw. "I thought I'd never hear it." Julia, sitting cross-legged on the rug beside them, responded gently, "I think he always knew the word. He just needed to feel safe saying it." Richard paused. "That's what breaks me," he said. "The idea that he's been holding it inside this whole time." "You didn't fail him," Julia said firmly. He looked at her. "I let doctors label him. I let strangers tell me who my son was. And I listened." Julia's voice softened. "You did what you thought was right. That doesn't make you wrong, it makes you human." He looked down at Noah, who had dozed off in his arms, face peaceful, breath steady. Everything I've built, Richard whispered. Every deal, every empire, it never meant anything. Not compared to this. The next morning the house felt different. There was no music, no fanfare, no celebration, but there was light in every window, every hallway. Even in Richard's face. He carried Noah down to the kitchen himself. Not a maid, not a nurse, just a father. When Julia greeted them, Noah looked at her, looked not past her, not through her, at her. Julia smiled. "Good morning, sweetheart," and Noah smiled back. It wasn't wide, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. Richard caught it. He smiled too. It was the first time the three of them had smiled in the same moment. They went to the pool again that afternoon. Noah didn't resist the vest. He didn't tense when the water touched his skin. He floated easier, breathed deeper. Julia was in the water with him, like before, but this time Richard didn't stay on the edge. He stepped in. Jeans rolled, heart wide open. He walked into the shallows and stood beside his son. Noah turned toward the movement, and for the first time lifted one hand, not waving, not reaching, but mirroring. He saw him, he knew him, and he wasn't afraid. Richard gently touched his son's hand in the water. "Hey buddy," he whispered. "You don't have to say it again. I heard you. I'll hear you every time." Julia stood quietly nearby, her heart full. Then Noah spoke again. This time not just a word, a feeling. He said it without being asked, unprompted. "Daddy." Richard laughed softly. Not from joy, from AEW. It was the laugh of a man who had wandered the desert and suddenly tasted rain that night. Julia sat outside on the back porch, watching the moon ripple in the pool. Richard joined her with 2 mugs of tea. He handed one to her in silence. They sat for a while, not speaking, until Richard said, "You've changed this house." Julia looked at him. "I didn't do it alone." "No," he said. "But you were the only one who saw him. Not the diagnosis, not the prognosis, just Noah." "I know what it's like to feel invisible," she said. Richard turned toward her. "Do you miss her, your daughter?" Julia nodded. "Every day." She took a sip, then added, "But today, it felt like something came back to life." Richard stared into the steam rising from his cup. "You know what scares me most?" he said. "That I might not deserve this. That after everything I did or didn't do, I don't deserve to hear him say Daddy." Julia's response was soft, but firm. "Deserve has nothing to do with love. You show up, you try again. That's what makes you his father." He looked at her truly, looked at her hand for the first time in months. He didn't feel like a man surrounded by failures. He felt like a man rebuilding. Later, when Richard tucked Noah into bed, he paused by the door and whispered, "Good night, son." From beneath the blanket came a quiet voice. "Good night, Daddy." The door didn't close for a long time. It started with a drawer that wouldn't open. Julia hadn't meant to snoop. She was dusting the study, the one room in the house Richard had asked her to clean only when you feel like it, which she took to mean, don't touch anything that hurts to remember. But the sunlight had caught the edge of the mahogany desk just right that afternoon. Dust danced like tiny ghosts. She wiped the surface carefully, then moved to the drawer on the right, tugged stuck. She tried again, gently, nothing, but it wasn't locked. It was stuck as if something inside had shifted and wedged against the frame. Her instincts, sharpened by grief and 1,000 quiet moments in this house, whispered, "Open it." Julia hesitated, then pulled one more time. It gave in with a soft click. Inside, a manila folder, a small stack of documents, and an old black leather notebook. Everything looked untouched for years. She knew that. But the name on the topmost paper stopped her. Noah Hale, patient file. Brightwell Behavioral Institute, Dr. Cedric M. Halston, MD, PhD. The air around her went still. Brightwell. She'd heard the name before. News articles, lawsuits, whispers of experimental therapy. She slid into the armchair and began to read. Half an hour later, Julia sat frozen, a cold knot in her stomach. Avoid eye contact. No external stimuli before 12 p.m. Medication dose may be increased if subject exhibits self-stimulating behaviors. Verbal reinforcement, unnecessary progress to be measured strictly by physical compliance. Compliance, not connection. Control, not care. Her hands trembled as she flipped through progress notes. One line scrawled by Dr. Halston read, "Subject continues to show resistance to behavior protocols. Recommend temporary isolation and aversion therapy to reduce noise-seeking behaviors, for example, water interaction, noise-seeking, water interaction." Julia's breath caught. They were punishing him for liking the sound of water. She closed the folder carefully, stared out the window at the pool, the place where Noah had smiled, floated, spoken. This wasn't neglect. This was intentional silencing. A soft knock on the study door made her flinch. "Richard, hey," he said, gently. "Didn't mean to scare you. Just thought I'd grab a book." Julia turned, slowly, folder still in hand. Their eyes met. For a moment, silence. Then she said, simply, "Richard, I need to show you something." They sat together on the leather couch, the documents between them like a wound laid bare. Richard read without speaking. Page after page, the deeper he read, the more he crumbled. Then, finally, his voice cracked. "I signed all this." His hands were shaking. He looked up at her with eyes that didn't know where to rest. "I let them do this to him. I paid them to do it." Julia placed a hand gently on his arm. "You didn't know." "I didn't ask," he snapped. Then softer, "I didn't want to know." She didn't reply. Some truths don't need answers. They need air. He leaned forward, pressing both hands into his face. "Do you understand what I let them steal?" His voice, his laughter, his joy. "I let them take it all. Because I was too afraid to believe he had any of it to begin with." His pain filled the room like smoke, thick, blinding. But Julia didn't flinch. She reached into the folder again, pulled out the small notebook. "I think this is yours," she said softly. Richard opened it. Inside were notes from his late wife, April 2nd. He looked at the rain today. Just watched it fall. He smiled. "I think he likes the sound it makes." May 19th. They want to increase his meds. I said no. I want to try music therapy first. I want him to feel safe. June 7th. He blinked when I whispered his name. He blinked. "Richard." Richard's lips parted, but no sound came out. He closed the book, held it to his chest. "I lost her, and I lost him," he whispered, "and I thought silence was safer than hope." Julia sat beside him, her voice like warm cloth. "You didn't fail them, you froze. That's what grief does. But now you're thawing." He looked at her, tears glistening in his lashes. "How do I make it right?" She took a long breath. "You listen, you keep listening, and when it hurts you, keep staying." That evening, they didn't go to the pool. They stayed inside. Julia made Noah's favorite, apples with peanut butter. Richard read from a picture book, his voice hesitant but full of warmth. Noah didn't say a word, but when Richard reached the last page, the boy crawled closer, laid his head against his father's side, and whispered something too soft to hear. But Richard didn't ask him to repeat it. He just smiled and held him tighter. Julia stepped out onto the patio later that night. The stars shimmered above the pool, and the water rippled gently in the breeze. In her hand, the last page of the medical file. She read it once more, then tore it in two. The past would not define the future. "David," Julia's voice carried. Down the hallway, low and careful, he was sitting on the edge of Noah's bed, hands clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. The boy was asleep beside him, curled up with his hands beneath his cheek, lips parted just slightly as he breathed. Julia stepped in slowly. "You've been in here for 2 hours." "I know," David said. His voice sounded raw. I don't want to miss it again." She sat down quietly on the reading chair across the room, the same one Grace used to sit in. "Miss what?" He hesitated, then said, almost a whisper, "The little things. The rise of his chest when he sleeps. The way he hugs that old stuffed shark. I missed all of it, Julia, for years." Julia didn't interrupt. Silence, sometimes, is the most healing sound. David looked down at his son. "He spoke to me last night." Not a full sentence. Just one word. "What did he say?" David's eyes welled up. "He said, stay." Julia closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. "That word," David whispered. It cut deeper than any accusation ever could, because it wasn't angry. It wasn't pleading. It was just ... honest. Later that morning, David walked into the kitchen where Julia was folding laundry. He cleared his throat. "There's a place," he said. "It's called Silverbrook Academy. They specialize in integrated learning programs for kids on the spectrum. Not institutions, real schools." With compassion, Julia turned toward him, interested. "They do music therapy, swimming, even horticulture. One of their alums now runs his own design firm. Another's a published poet." He placed a brochure on the counter. "I think Noah belongs there." She studied him. "You're thinking of sending him away?" "No," David said quickly. "We go. All of us." They have family residencies. Parents learn too how to communicate better, how to build structure without breaking spirit. Julia looked down at the brochure, then back at David. "You're changing," she said softly. He smiled a little, eyes still tired but clearer than they'd been in months. "No, I think I'm finally remembering who I was supposed to be." That afternoon, Noah sat by the pool again, this time with a toy keyboard across his lap. He was playing soft, aimless notes, no melody, just wandering sounds. Julia sat nearby, cutting apples into thin slices the way he liked them. Every few seconds, he'd pause and press a certain key repeatedly. It wasn't musical, it was rhythmic, like he was trying to say something in a language only he knew. David approached quietly and knelt beside his son. "Can I play something?" he asked. Noah didn't respond, but he didn't pull the keyboard away either. David pressed 3 keys, one low, one middle, one high, a gentle chord, nothing more. Noah blinked, then copied the same 3 notes. David smiled. "That's called a triad. It means harmony." Noah stared at the keys. David added softly, "Kind of like us. Different notes, but we make something better together." Noah pressed the same triad again. Julia caught her breath. That it wasn't just mimicry, it was connection. That night, while folding blankets in the living room, Julia found a crumpled paper beneath the couch, a drawing, crude and childlike, but unmistakable. It showed 3 stick figures, one tall, one medium, one small, standing beneath a blue sky. Next to a pool. In the corner, scribbled in purple crayon, were 2 words, "Noah's home." She stared at it for a long moment, then walked quietly to David's study. "Can we talk?" They sat across from each other, the drawing between them. Julia spoke first. "I never told you why I stayed, did I?" David shook his head. "No, and I didn't ask. I had offers," she said. "Other jobs, easier ones, cleaner ones, families that didn't hurt so much." David looked away, ashamed. "But the day I arrived," she continued, "I found a broken plate in the kitchen sink, one of those cheap ones, with the blue rim, and next to it was a sticky note in Grace's handwriting." David's eyes flicked up. "What did it say?" Julia swallowed. "It said, 'Don't throw it away. It's chipped, but still ours.'" Silence. Then Julia added, "That's how I saw Noah. That's how I saw you and me. We're chipped, but still ours." David's voice was barely audible. "I don't deserve either of you." "You don't have to," Julia said gently. "You just have to show up, every day, just like he asked." David nodded, eyes full. Then whispered, "Stay." Julia smiled. "I already have." The next morning, David stood on the back porch with a mug of coffee, watching Noah stack pebbles by the garden fountain. The boy was humming, not a song, just a sound that belonged to him. David turned as Julia stepped beside him, sipping her own cup. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He looked out at the yard, at the boy, at the new chapter waiting quietly in the wings. "I'm thinking," David said, "maybe healing isn't about fixing everything." He paused. "Maybe it's just about loving the pieces hard enough that they find a way back together." "You're sure you want to do this?" David's question lingered in the air like morning mist, soft but uncertain. He stood next to Julia on the front porch, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, Noah's backpack in his other hand. Julia nodded, the early sun catching the strands of silver in her hair. "Not just want to, need to." The car waited in the driveway, an old SUV with a modest roof rack, the rear window scribbled with Noah's crayon hearts from the inside. The inside of the house had been emptied of noise, clutter, and past ghosts. What remained was the silence before a page turns. David looked back one last time. Noah stood barefoot in the doorway, holding a small potted plant, a sunflower half-bloomed, its face turning slightly toward the east. He didn't speak, didn't move, just watched. "You ready, buddy?" David asked gently. Noah blinked, then stepped forward and handed the plant to his father. David looked at it, confused. "Julia," Noah finally said. "Hold." Julia knelt, touched. "You want me to hold it?" she asked. Noah nodded once, serious. She cradled it like a promise. Then Noah stepped down, took his father's hand. The road was long, carved between redwoods and sky, winding northward, toward Silverbrook Academy. It was a 4-hour drive, but it felt like shedding layers with every meal. Grief, shame, the heaviness of trying to rewrite the past. Julia sat in the back with Noah, showing him cloud shapes through the window. He didn't respond much, but his eyes followed hers. They passed a lake shimmering in early light. David murmured, "You know, Grace always said water reflects what we believe we are." Julia looked up. What did she mean? She used to take Noah to the pond behind the old studio. Said he only made eye contact when the surface was still. Said it calmed him, as if the water knew how to listen better than people did. He paused. "I think I'm just starting to understand what she meant." Silverbrook was not a castle. It was a series of low buildings painted cream and sky blue, nestled at the edge of a vast meadow. Wind chimes hung from trees, not alarms. The sound of laughter carried faintly across the grounds. A woman in her 50s greeted them, Dr. Elise Harding. The family liaison, her eyes were warm, her handshake gentle. We don't ask them to change here, she said, crouching to Noah's level. We ask the world to meet them where they are. Noah didn't flinch, just stared at her sunflower brooch. Dr. Harding smiled. You like sunflowers? Noah looked toward Julia, who still held the pot. Then, clear as day, he said. They turned toward the light. Dr. Harding blinked in quiet awe. Yes, sweetheart, yes they do. David's breath caught. They were shown to their cottage, a simple, two-bedroom unit overlooking the gardens. No locked doors, no surveillance cameras, just space and softness. That evening, after unpacking, David stepped out to the back porch. The sunset was molten gold, soaking the horizon. Julia joined him, 2 mugs of chamomile in hand. He took one, sipped in silence, then said, You ever think maybe we were the ones who needed this school more than he did? Julia smiled. Every day, David nodded. There's something I never told anyone, not even Grace. He stared out at the trees. The day Noah was born, the nurse placed him in my arms and said, He's perfect. And all I could think was, I hope I never break him. He exhaled, long and shaking. But I did, not all at once, just little cracks, absences, excuses, silence. Julia didn't rush him. I kept waiting for someone else to show up and fix it. And then one day I looked around, and it was just us. A broken father and a boy who stopped talking. He turned toward her. Then you came. Julia met his gaze, steady. I didn't fix anything, she said. I just stayed. Later that night, Noah couldn't sleep. Julia sat beside him, softly humming the tune he always responded to, something she'd once caught him mimicking on his keyboard. Julia, he whispered. She blinked. Yes, sweetheart. Is this where the light lives? She paused, then whispered, No, darling. The light lives inside you. Noah lay still for a moment, then said, Then I'll never be lost again. Tears welled up, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she leaned down and kissed his forehead. You were never lost, Noah. You were just waiting for us to see you. David stood in the doorway, watching. Tomorrow would begin the slow process of integration therapies, family workshops, new rhythms, but tonight was still, and in that stillness, he saw it, something he hadn't seen in himself for a long time. Hope. Not the kind that wishes for miracles, but the kind that builds them quietly, patiently, together. The piano wasn't perfect. A few keys stuck, one clinked like a teacup, and the pedal groaned slightly underfoot. But to David, it sounded like breath, earnest, imperfect, alive. He sat in the music room of Silverbrook, alone except for the morning light slanting through wide windows and a few birds gossiping just beyond the glass. His fingers hovered over the keys. Then came the smallest voice behind him. Play the blue one. David turned. Noah stood in the doorway, holding a soft gray blanket around his shoulders like a cape. The blue one, David echoed. Noah nodded. The one from Mummy's painting. David's throat tightened. He remembered it while Grace's painting of a lake at dusk. Water so still it held the sky's reflection. In the middle of the canvas, a single ripple, painted in hues of cobalt and indigo. Grace had called it stillness in motion. You remember that? Noah stepped closer, eyes clear. You played it once. Before bedtime, you thought I was asleep. David gently pressed the first note, a deep, aching G, then another. A lullaby not written, only felt. Noah climbed onto the bench beside him. For the first time, David didn't guide his hands. He waited. Noah placed one finger on a high note, then another. Off-key, messy, beautiful. Together, they built a song. Julia watched from the hallway, hand pressed to her chest. In that moment, she didn't see a boy with a diagnosis or a father weighed down by guilt. She saw a duet and finished. But finally, beginning later, over lunch beneath the sycamore trees, Julia turned to David. You know what that was? David raised an eyebrow. A miracle with 2 broken keys. She smiled. It was Noah speaking, not with words, with trust. He looked at her, then at Noah, who sat with another boy, both building something out of sticks and string. No instructions, no explanations. Do you think he remembers the bad parts? David asked quietly. Julia didn't rush. I think he remembers everything, but he's choosing what to carry forward. David nodded slowly. I wish I had that kind of strength. You do, Julia said, her voice firm. You just buried it under years of trying to be invincible. That evening, Silverbrook hosted a family circle. No stage, no spotlight, just a circle of chairs, parents and children side by side. A fire pit flickered in the middle. Dr. Harding welcomed them, then gestured to a young girl across the circle. She was blindfolded, holding a small bell. This is called the echo game, she explained. When you hear the bell, speak one thing, you want to be heard, not fixed. The rule is simple, no advice, no solutions, just listening. A silence. Settled. Then ding. The first voice came. Trembling. A mother. I'm afraid my daughter will never forgive me for the years I didn't understand. Ding. A boy's voice. I hate being called brave when I'm just tired. Ding. A man's voice, rough-edged. I wish I could hold my son's hand without wondering if I've earned it. David's turn. He didn't speak at first. Then very softly he said, I used to think love was something I gave. Now I'm learning it's something I receive. If I'm willing to stay. The fire crackled. Across from him, Noah sat still, eyes reflecting flame. Then ding. Noah's single quotes S voice. Clear. I like it when you wait for me. Julia's breath caught. David closed his eyes. That one sentence so simple, so shattering. He reached across the circle, palm open. Noah leaned forward and placed his hand inside his father's. Back in their cottage, Julia helped Noah into bed. Was quiet tonight, as if the day had emptied him in the best way. Julia, he murmured, double quotes, yes, sweetheart. You think Mommy heard the song? Julia smoothed his blanket. I think she's been listening all along. Noah nodded, satisfied, then asked, do people forget their broken pieces? She paused, brushing a curl from his forehead. No, she whispered, but if we're lucky, we learn to grow around them, like trees around fences. A long silence passed. Then, good night, Julia. Good night, Noah. In the living room, David sat with the sunflower on the windowsill, now fully open to the night. He looked at it, then at the stars. Thank you, he whispered. Not to the sky, not even to Grace, but to the moment. To this quiet, ordinary, breathtaking chapter he never saw coming. Daddy, you came back. Noah's voice sliced through the quiet like a violin string drawn slow and raw. David stood in the doorway of the Silverbrook gallery room, frozen. He hadn't expected anyone here, least of all his son, standing barefoot beneath the warm ceiling light, staring at the centerpiece painting. That it was the one Grace had never finished. A lake at sunset, hues of fire and dusk, interrupted by a pale, unfinished figure kneeling at the water's edge. The child's face was blank, as if Grace had never decided how to paint it. Or as if she had waited. I couldn't sleep, Noah said. I remembered this place. David took a slow step forward. I remember when your mum started that painting. She said it would only be finished when you were ready to see yourself. Noah tilted his head. Do you see me now? David swallowed. Every day Noah turned toward him, small hands clenched. Even when I screamed and covered my ears, even when I broke the lamp and couldn't say why, David didn't flinch, especially then. A silence held between them like a thread stretched tight across time. Then Noah whispered, I'm scared I'll go back to being lost. David knelt. Then I'll be the one holding the map. And if it rips. David reached out, cupping Noah's hands. Then we draw a new one. Together. Later that morning, Silverbrook held its closing gathering in the meadow. The grass was dewy, sunlight spilling like honey across the faces of every child and parent. Gathered. Dr. Harding spoke softly, hands clasped. You came to this place not for perfection, but for presence. For the chance to hear what isn't always said, and to speak without fear of being misunderstood. Julia stood beside David and Noah, her arm resting gently behind Noah's back. Harding continued. Each child here carries something unique, not a burden, but a language. And every adult here had to learn that love is not a rescue, it's an invitation. Noah glanced up at David. David smiled. We are SVPD. That afternoon the trio packed up their cottage. Julia folded Noah's drawings into a portfolio. David gathered the sunflower pot carefully into a box. As they stepped outside, a light summer rain began to fall, soft, not enough to send anyone running, just enough to make the earth smell alive. David hesitated at the edge of the gravel path. You ready, buddy? Noah looked up at the sky, blinking at the droplets. Wait. He ran back inside and returned with a marker, walking up to the wooden sign that read Silverbrook. He knelt and wrote something on the bottom corner. Read it aloud, smiling through tears. Still growing. 1 year later, a new home in San Francisco. The walls of the music room were painted warm cream. Sunlight poured through the open windows. Laughter echoed faintly from the kitchen where Julia hummed, packing lunchboxes. In the center of the room stood a large canvas, Grace's painting. Finally finished. The kneeling child now had a face, and in the child's reflection in the lake, a second figure, a father, reaching out his hand. Noah sat cross-legged by the canvas sketchbook. In lap, humming softly to himself, David entered, adjusting his tie. Big day. Noah nodded without looking up. Do I have to talk a lot? No. Just smile if you feel like it, or not. Either way, you're already everything she was proud of. A pause. Do you think Mummy is watching today? David crouched beside him. I think she never stopped. At the gallery, families, journalists, and guests wandered among artwork, most unaware of the quiet boy with curls and a calm presence near the back. David gave the opening speech, clear and steady. This exhibit isn't about art that stuns you with technique. It's about art that listens back. Every piece here was created by children who saw the world not as it is, but as it could be. He looked toward Noah. One of them reminded me that healing isn't something you force. It's something you honor. Applause rippled gently. Then Julia stepped forward. We called this exhibit the Pool of Light, because sometimes, even in the darkest waters, light finds a way to reflect. That evening, back home, the three of them sat on the porch. The city was a soft blur of sound beneath them. Noah curled against Julia, sketching quietly. David rocked gently beside them. Hey, Noah said suddenly. Guess what? What? Julia asked. I think I know what I want to be when I grow up. David smiled. Hit me a gardener. David blinked. Really? Noah nodded. Because gardeners don't fix things, they just help things grow. Julia covered her mouth, eyes watering. David whispered, I can't think of anything more important. The porch light flickered on, and beneath it, they sat, not perfect, not complete, but whole, a family.